Alice Morgan stood at the window of her corner office on the 38th floor, watching the late afternoon sun paint golden streaks across Chicago's skyline. Tomorrow would be her 40th birthday, and everything in her life seemed perfectly aligned. Senior partner at Davidson & Reed, loving husband, their dream house in Lincoln Park, she checked all the boxes society demanded and then some. Her phone buzzed. Another birthday wish, she assumed, reaching for it with a small smile. The smile froze on her face as she saw the sender's name, Leo Barrett. 10 years. It had been 10 years since she'd last heard from him. Her fingers hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. The preview showed only 5 words: "We need to talk about Greg." Greg. Her husband of 8 years. The man currently planning her surprise birthday party, a surprise she'd accidentally discovered when their housekeeper mentioned the catering order. The man who'd been acting different lately. Distant. Distracted. She'd attributed it to stress from his real estate development business, but now. "Ms. Morgan?" Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The Thompson deposition is starting in 5 minutes. "Right," Alice replied, her voice surprisingly steady. She locked her phone without opening Leo's message. Whatever game he was playing, it could wait. She had a witness to destroy. But throughout the deposition, as she methodically dismantled the opposing counsel's arguments, Leo's message burned in her pocket like a hot coal. Greg had been taking more business dinners lately. His phone would go silent when she entered the room. Small things. Things she'd dismissed until this moment. That evening, as she drove home through the gathering dusk, her mind wandered to the last time she'd seen Leo. It was at their favorite jazz club, the night she'd ended things. He'd grabbed her arm, his voice urgent. "You don't know him like I do, Alice. You're making a mistake." She'd pulled away, telling him to never contact her again. She pulled into their driveway, noting Greg's Tesla was already there. Earlier than usual. The house lights were off except for his study. As she entered, she heard his voice, low and intense. "It has to be tomorrow." "Yes, before the party. I know the risks." "No, Alice doesn't suspect anything." Alice stood in the darkened hallway, her heart pounding. Greg's voice dropped even lower, and she couldn't make out the rest. When he emerged from his study 10 minutes later, she was in the kitchen, calmly preparing dinner as if she'd just arrived. "Hey, beautiful," he said, kissing her cheek. He smelled of his usual cologne, but there was something else, a faint floral scent that definitely wasn't hers. "Sorry about the late meetings lately. This development deal is killing me." "No problem," she replied, noting how he avoided her eyes. "Everything okay?" "Of course," he said quickly. Too quickly. Why wouldn't it be? Later that night, after Greg had fallen asleep, Alice sat in their darkened living room, staring at Leo's unopened message. Her legal training screamed at her to leave it alone, to not risk the perfect life she'd built. But her finger moved of its own accord, opening the message. 2 more messages appeared. "I have proof, Alice. What I tried to tell you 10 years ago. I was right about him. Then, meet me tomorrow. 2 p.m. Our old place. You need to know the truth before it's too late." Alice looked at her sleeping husband, remembering his whispered phone conversation. "Before the party," he'd said. The same timeline Leo was pushing. She picked up her phone and typed 7 words that would shatter her carefully constructed world. "I'll be there. This better be good." Across town, in a dimly lit apartment, Leo Barrett smiled at her response. On his desk lay a manila envelope stuffed with photographs that would destroy not just a marriage, but an entire corporate empire. "Oh, it's better than good, Alice," he whispered to his screen. "It's devastating." The jazz from Buddy Guy's Legends drifted up through the afternoon air as Alice stood across the street, watching patrons drift in and out. How many afternoons had she and Leo spent here during law school, dreaming about their future between sets? Now those memories felt like scenes from someone else's life, rendered in faded sepia tones. She checked her watch, 1:55 p.m. Her birthday party preparations were underway at home, caterers and decorators transforming their space for tonight's surprise celebration. Greg had kissed her goodbye this morning with unusual intensity, his hands lingering on her shoulders. "Tonight will be unforgettable," he promised. The weight of those words felt different now. "You came." Leo's voice behind her carried the same quiet intensity she remembered. 10 years had treated him well, his dark hair now threaded with distinguished silver, his lawyer's suit impeccably tailored. But his eyes held something new, a hardness she didn't recognize. "I'm here for exactly 30 minutes, Alice replied, following him inside. They settled into their old corner booth, the familiar worn leather creaking beneath them. "Whatever game you're playing, Dash. This isn't a game." Leo placed a manila envelope on the table. "Remember the Morrison case? The one that made Greg's reputation in real estate development?" Alice felt her throat tighten. The Morrison development had been Greg's breakthrough project, transforming a struggling neighborhood into luxury condos. The profits had funded their wedding, their house, the life they'd built together. "What about it?" Leo's fingers drummed once on the envelope. 2 days before your wedding, Greg met with someone at the Drake Hotel. A woman. He slid out a photograph, Greg entering the hotel's side entrance, checking his surroundings. The timestamp showed 11:42 p.m. "Business meeting," Alice said automatically, but her legal mind was already cataloging details, Greg's nervous posture, the way he'd angled his face away from street cameras. The woman was Catherine Morrison. Leo produced another photo, Greg with a striking redhead in the hotel bar. The same Catherine Morrison who mysteriously changed her mind about fighting the development. The same night these were taken, she signed over her family's property rights. "The cornerstone of your husband's empire is built on that signature." Alice's training kicked in, analyzing angles, questioning authenticity. But she couldn't ignore the sick feeling in her stomach. That night, Greg had claimed he was in New York. She'd called his hotel room, he'd answered, background noise suggesting a busy restaurant. "Hotel phone routing," Leo said quietly, reading her thoughts. "Basic trick. He was playing you even then, Alice. Just like he's playing you now. Why bring this up now? After 10 years? Leo's expression shifted, something raw bleeding through his professional veneer. "Because history's repeating itself. 3 nights ago, Greg met with Claire Thompson." The name hit Alice like a physical blow. Claire Thompson, the key witness from her current case, the one whose deposition she'd just handled. The woman who'd unexpectedly changed her testimony, weakening the opposition's position significantly. That's impossible. The ethics violation alone. Check your firm's security footage. Tuesday night, 9:15 p.m. Greg signed in as a client of Marcus Reynolds. Marcus, her colleague who'd been surprisingly supportive of her handling the Thompson case solo, despite it being his client originally. The pieces started shifting, forming a new and horrifying picture. "There's more," Leo continued. "The Thompson deposition isn't just about corporate fraud. It's connected to the Morrison development. Your husband's entire business is a house of cards, Alice. And tonight. Stop." Alice held up her hand, her mind racing. Greg's whispered phone conversation, "It has to be tomorrow. Before the party." The sudden changes in Claire's testimony. Marcus's unusual behavior. She stood abruptly, gathering her coat. "I need to verify this. Alice." Leo caught her wrist, his touch sending unwanted electricity through her arm. "Whatever you're thinking of doing, be careful. Greg isn't just protecting himself anymore. The people involved in this, they play for keeps." She pulled away, but not before seeing something in his eyes: concern, yes, but also satisfaction. Like a chess player watching a carefully plotted strategy unfold. Back in her office, Alice accessed the security logs with trembling fingers. The footage was clear: Greg and Claire Thompson, entering a conference room Tuesday night. Their body language was intimate, familiar. As she watched Greg brush a strand of hair from Claire's face, Alice felt something inside her crystallize into cold, sharp clarity. Her phone buzzed, a text from Greg: "Can't wait to celebrate with you tonight. I love you." Alice stared at the message, remembering every late night, every suspicious phone call, every half-truth she'd accepted. The foundation of their life together suddenly felt as solid as smoke. She opened her desk drawer, removing a small recorder she used for depositions. Then she began making calls. If Greg wanted to play games, fine. But he'd forgotten something crucial: she didn't just marry into power. She'd earned her own. Across town, Leo made another call. She took the bait. "Everything's proceeding exactly as planned." He hung up, staring at the final photograph he hadn't shown Alice, one that would shatter not just her marriage, but everything she thought she knew about the past decade of her life. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Alice's office as she sat surrounded by stacks of case files, each one a piece of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving until today. The Thompson deposition transcripts lay open before her, but her mind kept drifting to quieter moments: Greg teaching her to dance in their kitchen, his patience as she stepped on his toes, the way he'd held her hand through her father's funeral, his strength becoming hers when she couldn't find her own. How do you reconcile the man who remembers how you take your coffee with the one who builds empires on betrayal? The security footage played on her laptop in an endless loop: Greg and Claire Thompson, their heads bent close together over documents. The intimacy of shared secrets. Alice paused the frame, studying the angle of Greg's shoulders, the protective way he leaned toward Claire. She'd seen that posture before, in photos from their early dating days, in countless moments she'd treasured as uniquely hers. "You shouldn't be here," Marcus Reynolds said from her doorway, his usual smooth confidence fractured by concern. "The party dash." "Tell me about Tuesday night," Alice interrupted, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had won her countless courtroom victories. "When Greg signed in as your client." Marcus's hesitation lasted less than a second, but it was enough. In that microscopic pause, Alice saw the careful construction of a lie, watched him choose his words with practiced precision. A routine consultation about property valuations. Nothing more. Interesting. Alice pulled up an email on her screen. "Because according to this thread, you were in New York Tuesday night, presenting to the Thompson board." She smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. "Would you like to revise your statement, counselor?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Marcus closed her office door, his shoulders sagging. "You don't understand what you're walking into, Alice. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed." She stood, gathering the files into her briefcase. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." As she drove home to prepare for her birthday party, memories filtered through her mind like light through stained glass, moments that seemed pure now casting shadows of doubt. The late-night phone calls Greg claimed were about business deals. The weekend trips that always seemed to coincide with major case developments. Even their first meeting, at that charity gala where he'd seemed to know so much about her work, her interests. Had anything been real? She pulled into their driveway, noting the catering vans already lined up. Through the windows, she could see the shimmer of party decorations, the movement of hired staff transforming their home into a celebration space. A celebration of what? A marriage built on carefully constructed lies? Her phone buzzed, another message from Leo: "There's something else you need to see. Something about the night we broke up." Alice stared at the message, a cold realization seeping through her veins. That night at the jazz club. Leo had been so insistent about Greg, so certain. What if? She dialed a number she'd looked up earlier. Detective Martinez? This is Alice Morgan. I need everything you have on the Morrison development investigation from 10 years ago. Yes, I know it's closed. I also know you never believed the official story. Upstairs, she changed for the party with mechanical precision, each movement deliberate. The black dress she chose was a weapon in its own right, elegant, understated, dangerous. As she fastened her grandmother's pearls around her neck, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't just a wife discovering betrayal or a lawyer uncovering fraud. She was something far more dangerous, a truth seeker with nothing left to lose. Her phone lit up with a text from Greg, heading home now. Can't wait to celebrate with my beautiful wife. Another message followed immediately, this one from an unknown number, Ms. Morgan, about the Morrison case. There's something you should know about how your husband really made his fortune. And about what really happened to Catherine Morrison after that hotel meeting. In her home office, Alice opened her laptop one last time before guests would arrive. A search algorithm she'd set up earlier pinged with results, financial transfers, shell companies, a web of connections spanning a decade. At the center of it all, a single name kept appearing, Barrett Industries. Leo's family company. The pieces shifted again, forming a new pattern, one that suggested she wasn't just uncovering her husband's betrayal. She was being maneuvered into position, a queen on someone else's chessboard. The doorbell rang. The first guests arriving for her surprise party. Alice closed her laptop, touched up her lipstick, and smiled at her reflection. Let them all think they were playing her. She'd learned long ago that the most dangerous player at any table was the one everyone underestimated. Tonight wouldn't just be about confronting betrayal. It would be about understanding why she'd been chosen as the catalyst for whatever game was truly being played. And then she would rewrite all their rules. The first guests arrived like actors taking their marks, their practiced surprise echoing through the foyer of Alice's home. She greeted them with the polished smile she'd perfected in courtrooms, watching their performances with new eyes. How many of them knew? How many were complicit in the elaborate dance of deception that had become her life? Detective Martinez's words from their hurried meeting that afternoon echoed in her mind. Catherine Morrison didn't just sell her property rights that night, Mrs. Morgan. She sold her silence. 3 months later, she disappeared. The official story was that she moved to Europe. Funny thing is, her passport has never been used since. The weight of the recorder in Alice's clutch felt heavier with each arrival. She'd positioned small recording devices throughout the house earlier, legal in Illinois, as Greg himself had once proudly told her when installing security cameras. The irony wasn't lost on her. Alice. Marcus Reynolds appeared at her elbow, a glass of champagne in his outstretched hand. His eyes held a warning she couldn't quite decipher. We should talk. She followed him to Greg's study, noting how he carefully closed the door. Through the window, she could see more guests arriving, their laughter carrying across the manicured lawn. Whatever you think you know, Marcus began, whatever Leo Barrett has told you, it's not that simple. It never is. Alice perched on Greg's desk, her fingers brushing the leather folder where she'd found the transfer documents earlier. Tell me about Claire Thompson. The real story. Marcus's hesitation spoke volumes. She came to us. Said she had information about irregularities in the Morrison development. Information that could complicate things for a lot of people. Including Leo Barrett. The slight widening of Marcus's eyes confirmed her suspicion. How did you dash? The shell companies weren't as well hidden as you thought. Alice pulled out her phone, showing him the financial web she'd uncovered. Barrett Industries has been quietly acquiring properties around every major development Greg has handled in the last decade. Almost like they knew exactly where to invest. Almost like someone was feeding them information. Outside, a car door slammed. Greg's Tesla pulling into the driveway. He was trying to protect you, Marcus said quietly. We all were. The things Catherine Morrison knew. Save it. Alice stood, smoothing her dress. I don't need protection, Marcus. I need truth. And I'm going to get it, one way or another. The study door opened, revealing Greg's broad shoulders, his familiar cologne washing over her. His smile faltered slightly when he saw Marcus, but he recovered quickly. There you are, beautiful. Ready for your surprise? Alice stepped into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her chest. The same heart that had supposedly beaten for her alone for 8 years. Actually, she whispered, I have a surprise for you. She pulled back, meeting his eyes. Catherine Morrison is alive. The color drained from Greg's face. Behind him, Marcus made a choked sound. She contacted my office this morning, Alice continued, each word measured and precise. Apparently, she's been living quite comfortably in Vancouver. Until last week, when someone tried to access her safety deposit box, the one containing the original documents from the hotel meeting. It was a lie, but Alice watched it land like a precision strike. Greg's hands tightened on her arms, his mask slipping for just a moment. In that instant, she saw everything: fear, calculation, and something else. Something that looked almost like relief. We should join the party, he said, his voice strained. Everyone's waiting. Yes, Alice agreed, noting how Marcus had positioned himself between them and the door. They certainly are. As they moved through their home, guests raising glasses and calling out birthday wishes, Alice felt a strange sense of clarity. The truth wasn't in the documents or the recordings or even the carefully orchestrated revelations. It was in the spaces between, the silent conversations happening in glances across the room, the subtle shifts in allegiance as word spread that Catherine Morrison had resurfaced. Her phone buzzed one last time. Leo, don't trust anyone. Not even me. Alice slipped the phone back into her clutch, accepting another glass of champagne. The night was still young, and the real surprise was yet to come. In her other hand, she held the final piece of the puzzle, a simple business card given to her by Detective Martinez. On it, a single name and number, Catherine Morrison. The real Catherine Morrison, who had never left the country at all. Who had been waiting 10 years for someone to ask the right questions. As Greg clinked his glass for a toast, his hand steady but his eyes wary, Alice smiled. The truth about that night at the Drake Hotel was about to come out. And it wasn't at all what Leo Barrett had led her to believe. The crystal champagne flute felt cool against Alice's palm as she watched her birthday party unfold like a carefully orchestrated theater production. Each guest played their role perfectly, the concerned friends, the supportive colleagues, the mysterious figures lurking at the edges of conversations. But beneath the surface of celebration, currents of tension swirled like dark water. What transformed her wasn't the betrayal itself, but the quiet revelation that came with it: she had been playing a role in someone else's story for far too long. In the kitchen, away from prying eyes, Alice finally opened the file Detective Martinez had given her. Catherine Morrison's statement lay inside, its pages yellow with age but its truth preserved like amber. I never met Greg Morgan at the Drake Hotel. I was supposed to, but someone else showed up instead, Leo Barrett. He offered me a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. The words blurred as pieces clicked into place. Leo hadn't shown her photos of betrayal that night at the hotel, he'd shown her evidence of his own elaborate manipulation. A decade-long game where she and Greg were merely pieces on a board, moved by hands they couldn't see. You figured it out. Greg's voice, soft and tired, came from behind her. When she turned, she saw not the confident businessman or the suspected betrayer, but simply a man worn down by years of carrying a burden he'd never shared. I couldn't tell you. They had too much leverage. Barrett Industries, Alice said, watching his face. They've been orchestrating everything from the beginning. The Morrison development, Claire Thompson, even our meeting at the gala, none of it was accidental. Greg leaned against the counter, his shoulders sagging. Leo's father had dirt on my family from way back. Used it to force me into being their inside man. But then I met you, really met you, not just as part of their plan, and everything changed. I thought if I could just play their game long enough, build enough power to fight back. Why now? Alice asked, her voice steady despite the earthquake of emotions beneath it. Why is Leo choosing this moment to unravel everything? Because of what you discovered in the Thompson case. Greg pulled out his phone, showing her an email. The fraud goes deeper than anyone realized. Barrett Industries isn't just manipulating real estate deals, they're laundering money for half the power players in Chicago. Your investigation was getting too close. Alice absorbed this, feeling not anger but a profound sense of clarity. So they tried to turn me against you. Make me the instrument of your destruction. And there's, came Marcus's voice from the doorway. He entered, closing the door behind him. They didn't count on you being thorough enough to trace the shell companies. Or smart enough to bluff about Catherine Morrison still being alive. A laugh bubbled up in Alice's throat, not bitter, but genuinely amused. They thought they could use my birthday party as cover for their final move. Turn me into the vengeful wife, the betrayed partner, too emotional to see the bigger picture. She set down her champagne glass, straightening to her full height. But they forgot something crucial. I'm not just your wife, Greg. I'm not just a pawn in their game. I'm Alice Morgan, and I've spent my entire career turning other people's evidence against them. She pulled out her phone, showing them the recording app that had been running since the party began. Every conversation, every revelation, every piece of the puzzle, all captured and automatically uploaded to secure servers. We have one advantage they don't know about, she continued, her voice taking on the quiet intensity that had made her legendary in courtrooms. Catherine Morrison didn't just disappear. She left a trail, documentation of every meeting, every threat, every manipulation. Detective Martinez has been building this case for a decade, waiting for someone to connect the dots. Greg stared at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're not just defending against their attack. No, Alice smiled, and in that smile was the strength of a woman who had discovered that truth was her most powerful weapon. I'm ending their entire empire. Tonight. Outside, the party continued its elaborate dance of secrets and lies. But here in the kitchen, three people stood in a moment of perfect clarity, understanding that the real power lay not in manipulation or revenge, but in the simple, devastating force of truth finally spoken aloud. Alice's phone buzzed one final time. Leo, trying to maintain control of his collapsing scheme, whatever you think you know, you don't understand the forces you're dealing with. She typed back 7 words that would begin the dismantling of an empire. No, Leo. You never understood your opponent. In her clutch, Catherine Morrison's full statement waited like a loaded gun. But Alice had learned something powerful in the last 24 hours. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the secret you expose, but the truth you choose to tell about yourself. The real surprise of her 40th birthday wasn't discovering betrayal, it was discovering that she had always been stronger than any game others tried to play with her life. The moon hung low over Chicago's skyline as Alice's birthday party reached its final act. The remaining guests had gathered in the garden, their conversations a quiet murmur beneath the gentle autumn breeze. String lights twinkled overhead like stars, casting soft shadows across faces that now held entirely new meanings for Alice. She stood at the edge of the gathering, watching the subtle dance of power shifting beneath the surface of polite society. In the past 24 hours, she had learned that strength rarely announced itself with dramatic gestures. True power lay in the quiet moments of choice, in the deliberate decision to write your own story rather than playing a role in someone else's. Greg approached, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. The weight of unspoken truths between them had transformed into something unexpected, not the bitter ashes of betrayal, but the foundation of a deeper understanding. Leo's been arrested, he said quietly, offering her a glass. Detective Martinez moved as soon as you sent Catherine's statement. They found everything, the original documents, the money trails, even recordings of the threats against my family. Alice accepted the champagne, studying its golden depths. It was never about the Morrison development, was it? Or even about us. Leo's father used that project to build an empire of secrets and leverage, and Leo thought he could use me to protect it when it started crumbling. He underestimated you, Greg smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached his eyes. They all did. They saw the perfect wife, the successful lawyer, the woman who had everything to lose. They never saw the woman who had everything to gain, Alice finished. By facing the truth rather than running from it. Across the garden, Marcus was speaking quietly with Detective Martinez, likely negotiating the terms of his cooperation. The detective caught Alice's eye and nodded slightly, acknowledgement of a partnership that had helped dismantle a decade of corruption in a single evening. The night air carried the fading notes of jazz from somewhere distant, reminding Alice of another evening long ago when she'd walked away from Leo at their favorite club. She had thought then that she was choosing security over passion, certainty over truth. Now she understood that the real choice had been far simpler, she had chosen herself. "I'm sorry," Greg said softly, his voice carrying years of regret. "For not trusting you with the truth from the beginning. I thought I was protecting you, but really. You were protecting yourself," Alice finished, but there was no accusation in her tone. "We all build walls thinking they'll keep us safe, never realizing they're also keeping us trapped." She turned to face him fully, seeing not the man who had kept secrets or the businessman entangled in corruption, but the partner who had finally chosen truth over safety. "The question isn't whether we can go back to what we were. It's whether we're brave enough to build something new, something honest." Greg's hand found hers, warm and familiar yet somehow different. "And are we?" Alice's response was interrupted by a commotion at the garden entrance. Catherine Morrison stood there, elegant in a simple black dress, her presence electric in its implications. She had finally emerged from hiding, ready to tell her story, not out of revenge or bitterness, but because truth, once recognized, demanded to be spoken. The gathered guests fell silent, understanding that they were witnessing not just the end of a power structure, but the birth of something new. Alice moved forward to greet her, each step deliberate and purposeful. This was her real birthday gift, not the destruction of an empire built on lies, but the creation of a life founded on truth. The realization that strength wasn't found in revenge or power over others, but in the courage to face reality and choose transformation over comfort. As the night drew to a close, Alice and Greg stood in their garden, watching the last guests depart. The string lights reflected in the pool, creating patterns that seemed to dance and shift like the boundaries of their new understanding. "Happy birthday," Greg whispered, and in those simple words lay a promise, not of perfection or unbroken trust, but of the chance to build something real from the fragments of what they had thought was unbreakable. Alice squeezed his hand, feeling the strength in her own grip. The woman who had started this journey seeking revenge had discovered something far more valuable, the power of her own truth, the courage to face it, and the wisdom to use it not as a weapon, but as a foundation for renewal. Above them, the moon continued its arc across the sky, casting new shadows, illuminating new paths. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, statements to be given, cases to be built, truths to be faced. But tonight, in this moment, Alice Morgan stood complete in herself, neither victim nor avenger, but something far more powerful. A woman who had chosen to write her own story, and found that the ending was just another beginning.